How to understand when a woman deliberately blames you before a breakup. I've noticed a certain pattern. At the beginning of a relationship, men typically don't invest much, neither in the relationship itself, nor in the woman, nor in their shared future. However, over time, month by month, year by year, men start taking things more seriously. Especially if the relationship becomes long-term or transitions into a family dynamic, men tend to put in increasingly more effort. Ironically, at the very moment when the woman decides to leave, the man's efforts often reach their peak. The man tries his best, but here's the paradox: the woman, on the other hand, stops putting in effort. Think back to the early stages of the relationship, when the man was practically nobody to her. She gave her all, worked hard, and was always in a good mood. But as time goes on, her efforts gradually decrease. By the time the breakup is on the horizon, she's doing almost nothing, yet this is precisely when she starts blaming the man. The situation becomes absurd. She does nothing, and you're doing everything you can. You're giving 100%, ready to go to any lengths, while she's unwilling to do anything. And at the same time, she says, "It's all your fault. You're the reason this happened." When you ask how exactly you're to blame, she brings up the beginning of the relationship. "You didn't invest enough in me back then, and that's why things are like this now." But this argument doesn't make sense because you steadily increased your efforts and are now giving it your all. The reality is that the reason for the breakup isn't that you supposedly didn't try hard enough in the beginning. That's just an excuse to justify her actions. The real reasons are always something else. This is the video you must share with your best friend. Why do women blame men in relationships? Many people don't understand this, but let me explain. The first stage of a relationship is the honeymoon phase. During this time, women typically have no complaints about men, everything feels perfect. But over time, the second stage begins, the cooling off phase, where emotions gradually fade. This is where everything starts to change. A woman might raise her voice, take offense, or create a conflict. What's fascinating is that this behavior is common. Even in couples who have been together for years and have children, a woman might shout at her partner. But could this have happened 3 weeks into meeting each other? Of course not. At the beginning of a relationship, when you were practically strangers, she didn't raise her voice, even though you weren't a significant person in her life yet. At first glance, this seems illogical. But there is an explanation. As the level of love hormones decreases, small things begin to irritate her. As a result, her behavior may gradually worsen. At this point, she has 3 potential ways to respond, and her choice will determine the course of your relationship. Take a moment to think about your ex. How did she behave in similar situations? Option 1, the rarest option. The woman starts looking for the reasons for her behavior within herself. She asks, "Why am I getting upset over small things? Why have I started raising my voice at him? This isn't acceptable." She tries to adjust her behavior. If you're lucky enough to meet a woman like this, you probably don't even need my videos. Option 2, a relatively healthy approach. The woman feels discomfort due to the fading feelings but, instead of blaming you, focuses on what can be done to improve the relationship. This constructive approach is rare but commendable. Option 3, the most common and, frankly, stereotypical response. This is the path that destroys 95% of relationships. This happens when fading feelings lead a woman to think, "It's not about me, it's about how he hurt me long ago." A woman suddenly begins to recall past events. She might say you didn't appreciate her, insulted her, scared her, yelled at her, forbade something, and so on. The strangest part? These references might stem from 1 or 2 situations that happened long ago. Maybe, at the time, you were in the wrong. But the question arises, why does it matter now? Why does this suddenly become relevant 2 or 3 years later? Today, she's behaving poorly and causing conflicts, yet she claims, "It's all because, 3 years ago, you treated me unfairly." Of course, this leads to confusion. After all, you continued the relationship after that moment. You acknowledged your mistake and made sure it wouldn't happen again. Why, then, does this serve as justification for her current behavior? Not only is this a strange excuse, but it's also a destructive approach that doesn't help improve the relationship. When you try to explain that it's important to move on, let go of the past, and focus on the present, the response is often the same. I can't forget it. Do you know how much it hurt me? I just stayed silent and endured, but back then, you really hurt me. And you begin to wonder, did she even love me? Her words become increasingly emotional, she dramatizes the situation, and you realize that a constructive dialogue is impossible. She doesn't want to resolve anything. Here's the key point: if, for a woman, the meaning of the relationship lies solely in the romantic feelings that have now faded, saving the relationship in the moment becomes nearly impossible. Her motivation disappears, and she's unwilling to put in the effort. She doesn't try to address her grievances, understand the situation, or take a constructive approach. I've witnessed situations where a man tried to explain to his partner that her complaints were baseless and offered to discuss ways to improve their current relationship. But often, in such cases, the woman simply starts crying and says, "I can't control my emotions." At this point, the man begins to doubt himself, thinking that perhaps he truly was at fault back then. The key to overcoming a relationship crisis. The key lies in changing your approach, prioritizing the relationship itself over the feelings you derive from it. This is the essence of it all. When the relationship takes priority, it becomes something you can work on, improve, develop, and navigate through challenges. But what happens when feelings take precedence over the relationship? When feelings are the priority, and the relationship takes a back seat? The outcome is logical. The person will simply seek new relationships in pursuit of fresh emotions. And that's it. End of story. This is why it's crucial to choose a partner who values the relationship more than her personal feelings. And that's exactly what I'll be talking about on this channel. Subscribe, because as soon as we grow as a community, I'll share methods to identify a good woman, how to find her, and how to navigate a relationship the right way. Believe me, this channel is your lifeline. I've been in a similar situation before, experienced pain, and that's precisely why I decided to dedicate my life to the psychology of relationships. I've always wondered, how could that sweet girl, with whom everything was so perfect, change so much? How could she become constantly angry, irritated, upset, and at times even ruthless? In moments like these, it feels like she has no empathy or understanding, only indifference or hostility. To understand why this happens, let's imagine a person who loves coffee, sweets, smoking, or drinking. Now, let's take all that away. What would happen? These things are sources of quick dopamine. If you take them away, you'll see that, within a day or two, this person becomes irritable, restless, and unhappy with everything around them. Give it 2 or 3 weeks, and it gets worse. From my own experience, when I had to give up such dopamine pleasures, it was so hard that I sometimes broke down in tears. Something similar happens with a woman who has gradually fallen out of love with you. This doesn't happen overnight, it's a gradual process, day by day. The conditions of your relationship remain the same, but her coldness grows. What makes it worse is that, when you choose to give up a bad habit yourself, you know it's your responsibility. You understand it will be hard, but there's no one to blame, it's your decision. Now imagine if your access to dopamine was taken away by someone else. In this case, you'd likely direct your anger toward whoever took it away. For instance, if you lock an addicted person in a room or take a computer away from a child addicted to gaming, it's highly likely to provoke aggression or a tantrum. And here's the harsh truth of life. If someone falls out of love with you, they won't apologize for it. On the contrary, they're more likely to retaliate. This is like a childish revenge for unmet expectations. That's just how it works. In the first stage of falling out of love, a woman usually doesn't admit it outright. She might say something like, "I love you, but your behavior upsets me." But by the second stage, it becomes clear, she'll directly tell you, "You've gone too far. I don't feel anything for you anymore." From my experience, the people who behave well are often the ones blamed the most. Why? Because if a man is truly a scoundrel and acts accordingly, there's no need to blame him, His bad behavior is already obvious. But if you've done nothing wrong, blaming you becomes a necessity to justify her actions. If you've done a lot of good for an ungrateful person, it's the worst-case scenario. In such situations, you may face relentless accusations, lies, and fabricated problems. Let's imagine a businessman who owns a company that's no longer profitable. What does he do? He realizes there's no future benefit and initiates bankruptcy proceedings to minimize losses and start something new. A woman does something similar. Instead of bankruptcy, she begins to devalue everything you've done for her while simultaneously instilling guilt in you. Because when a relationship ends, someone always has to take the blame. There are only two options: either you're the one to blame, or she is. Unfortunately, there's no middle ground. So if you've started hearing accusations more frequently, it's highly likely that the bankruptcy process has already begun. The decision has been made, and everything happening now is just the execution of that decision. If you doubt this, conduct an experiment, carefully observe her behavior and actions, and you'll see for yourself where this is heading. Give her the freedom to voice every realistic wish for your relationship. Does she want you to speak to her in a whisper? Fine, whisper. Does she want you to spend most of your money on jewelry and a vacation in the Maldives? If you're willing, spend it. Does she want to drive your car? Let her. Does she want to go clubbing with her friend and party all night? Be my guest. And once you do all of this, the result will surprise you, or rather, the lack of one will. At that moment, it becomes clear that the real cause of conflicts isn't the conditions of your relationship. The real reason is that she has already realized that the feeling of being in love can only be reignited with someone new. When a man thinks a woman has left for nothing, that's not entirely true. She's left in search of something new. Moreover, if her accusations become aggressive, you can be almost certain she's already noticed someone else, or perhaps even shown interest in them. To understand her feelings, imagine this scenario. You come across an online listing for an apartment. You scroll through the photos and think, wow, what a renovation. And that view from the window, amazing? What's the next step to get that apartment? That's right, you sell the old one. Would you feel sorry for your old apartment in this situation? Probably not. Maybe just a bit of nostalgia. But what happens next? You start noticing all its flaws, the inconvenient location, the traffic jams, the outdated feel. It's just no longer appealing. That's exactly what happens with a woman at the end of a relationship. She starts examining your flaws under a microscope, trying to rid herself of the last traces of nostalgia and make the transition emotionally easier for herself. I want to say something important. No one is free from making mistakes. In any long-term relationship, both partners, men and women, carry their own ace up the sleeve, a set of real and valid grievances. But the person who throws those grievances on the table first with the words, "I've had enough, I'm leaving," often commits the greater betrayal. Of course, I can't judge a woman who leaves a man if he cheated. She has every right to do so. But in real life, I hear entirely different stories of men who are willing to do absolutely anything for the women they love. Their level of motivation is off the charts. If they were told, walk 500 kilometers on foot, here's some rations, a tent, and clothing, they'd reply, easy. And yet, in response, the woman often says, I gave you a chance, and you didn't take it. Here's the question: even if a man made mistakes, why isn't he given a real opportunity to fix them? Is this some kind of punishment? She outright says, you ruined everything. We're breaking up, splitting the kids and the house. You respond, I don't want this. What can I do to stop it? And the reply is, nothing. It's too late. Then you ask, why? Was it too late yesterday or not yet? Who decides when it's too late? If you decide, why not make it so it's not too late? But she doesn't provide clear, actionable conditions. And do you know why? Because there's a risk you might meet those conditions. And if you do, and she still leaves, it will become obvious that the issue wasn't about those conditions at all. Moreover, she can't articulate those conditions clearly because the real reason isn't in them. All she can say is, I don't know what I want, but but I'm certain nothing can be fixed anymore. Yes, some of her complaints might be valid. But here's the bigger question. Why doesn't she make genuine, honest attempts to improve and save the relationship? Why does it always come down to accusations and the decision to leave, instead of seeking compromise and finding solutions? How do women most often blame men? There are two main approaches. First approach. She focuses on a specific event from the past that is convenient to highlight. This could be a situation where you were indeed in the wrong. Women tend to emphasize such moments because it's difficult for you to argue against them. Perhaps you've already admitted your guilt, and that's precisely why she brings it up. It's like a trump card in her hand, and she uses it. But here's the logical question. Can one mistake really outweigh all the good things in a relationship? It's absurd. If this logic is applied universally, any relationship can be destroyed. There's always some argument to justify it. Second approach. The accusations take on a generalized form. For example, you emotionally oppressed me and hurt me, and I can't forgive you. Or, did you really think all of this would go without consequences? In such cases, the woman tries to convince both herself and you that the relationship was pure torment for her. And here's another question. If it was so terrible, why didn't she leave sooner, after 6 months or a year? Her answer will likely be, I endured it out of nobility. The point here is that if a woman decides to deceive herself, stopping this process is almost impossible. You speak the language of facts, while she speaks the language of imagined grievances and accusations. You try to get to the truth, but she distorts it instead. Imagine you're facing a criminal case, and someone paid off the right people. You could bring in 100 witnesses, submit expert reports, and provide an alibi, but the verdict will remain the same, guilty. In relationships, this manifests as the man beginning to fear his partner's reactions. It's a sign he's already been convicted, even if they're still together. It's not normal to sit there wondering, is she not replying because she's busy? Or maybe she's upset. You start replaying recent conversations in your mind, searching for what you might have done wrong. Remember, accusations often stem from distant past events that she chooses to dredge up and use to justify her actions. So, she brings up an old grievance, highlights an event, and assigns it significance. I could understand if she said something like, listen, this situation, your words, or your behavior upset me. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again. That would be a constructive approach, one focused on the future. After all, the past, by its nature, no longer exists. Everything that was said or done remains in the past, and it cannot be changed. In my opinion, blaming someone for the past is a huge mistake. No matter what you do, you can't undo what's already happened. Constructive guilt is about acknowledging your mistake and being willing to avoid repeating it in the future. It should not evoke feelings of helplessness but rather foster a strong desire to improve your behavior moving forward. And that's it. If a woman isn't satisfied with this approach and says, it's already too late, she's essentially revealing her true intentions. Her grievance is merely a cover, an excuse not to work on the relationship. Some might argue, perhaps these mistakes affected her feelings, but if that were truly the case, the impact would have been immediate. More importantly, she would be invested in fixing those mistakes. Yet she's not. What's worse, she doesn't leave right away but stays for a while longer. And here's the most frustrating part, you're not even given the chance to fix your mistake. You say, I'm ready. What do you need? I'll make it right. And her response is, no, it's already too late. Nothing you do will help. All that's left for you is to suffer. This brings us to a rhetorical question. Can a person who loves you or even respects you act this way? Of course not. It's akin to a situation where a child has their computer taken away. The person wants to indulge in a new addiction, and you're standing in the way. You become an obstacle. And how do people react to obstacles? There's a desired source of gratification, and then there's you. She starts to resent you deeply. If the person also has unresolved emotional issues or certain pathological tendencies, that resentment can even escalate into hatred. In short, if someone close decides to blame you, your chances of escaping unscathed are slim. At first, you'll try to justify yourself, explain, or even argue, because, logically, that's what anyone would do. But the result is likely to be negative. After yet another conflict and emotional distance from her side, your nerves will fray, and you'll probably explode. Naturally, that moment will also be used against you. Next, with every ounce of your emotional strength, you'll put in daily effort to fix the situation. Unfortunately, it won't help. We've already discussed why this doesn't work. Eventually, out of despair or panic, you'll start doing irrational things in the relationship and then apologizing for them. By this point, it will be hard to call you emotionally stable. In the morning, you'll be convinced of your righteousness, but by evening, you'll doubt everything. This is a vicious cycle. And most of you have probably experienced something similar. If you've successfully been blamed into a corner, there are 3 options for how to proceed. Let's quickly break them down. Option 1. Minimize the importance of this situation. Give it a month, 6 months, or a year, and your sense of perspective will return. You'll be able to see things differently and realize it wasn't as catastrophic as it seemed. Option 2. Meet a good, intelligent, and decent woman with whom you can discuss your past relationship. Listen to her reactions, her evaluation of your behavior and your ex's actions. This can quickly help you gain clarity and understand the situation. Option 3, for the risk takers, try to prove to your ex that you've changed. Write to her, explaining that you've learned from your mistakes and won't repeat them. Let her think about it. After a week, 2, or 3, you'll notice that she's not coming back and doesn't even plan to. At that point, you'll finally understand that it was never about the mistakes.